Hello. Oh, so it's Alan Rule from alanrule.com, and we are going to talk today, or I'm going to talk rather, about the Crusades. Now, it says ask me anything about the Crusades, and you can ask me anything. Now, until more people come in, I'm going to be talking about the Crusades. So if you want, you can ask me questions. I'm just going to give an intro to the Crusades. Now where should we begin? All right, well, the Holy Land. When we think of the Crusades, we think of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And the Kingdom of... Hold on, I'm going to share the video because just want everyone to know I'm live. Quote, I'm live. Exclamation mark. All right, let's get back to... Okay. All right, you have the Crusades. The Crusades start in 1096, Council of Clermont, and that's when they're called. Then they go all the way down to 1291. Now, that's when the Crusader states fall. You still had Crusades after that, such as the Crusade of Nicopolis, the Crusade of Varna. The Battle of Lepanto was considered a crusade because it was against the evil Turks who were enemies of Jesus Christ, and they still are to this day. Most Turks, anyway. So, all right, you have the Kingdom of Jerusalem. We think of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but okay, you have the Muslims come on the scene. It starts in the first quarter of the 7th century in Arabia, what is today Saudi Arabia, and Muhammad dies in 632, and then about a year or two later, they start invading the surrounding kingdoms, first the Byzantine Empire, then the Persian Empire, then they expand far beyond that. So within a few years of Muhammad's death, the entire Middle East is Muslim. Now, of course, they go all the way into Spain, the Muslims, and they go very far in the opposite direction. That direction is not important for what we're doing. So you've got the Crusades coming in the 11th century. So about 400 plus years after the Muslims had invaded. And so in that time period, it had gone through various Muslim empires here. And at the time, well, you have a Shia group out of Egypt called the Fatimids who are controlling... oh, wait, hold on. I got to text someone. Okay, so where were we? So the time around the year 1000, the Holy Land is... hey, brother, God bless you. Hello. So the format is I'm just going to talk about the Crusades. Who was the best? All right, we're putting this Original Wind Productions. I like that name. This is John Fisher, by the way, everyone. He's a top apologist, and I'm going to be moderating one of his debates with Father James coming up in about a month's time. And that debate is about the papal infallibility and is it consistent with Scripture or not? Let me just... Okay. All right. Who was the best crusader? Oh, man. I'm going to be unpopular when I say this because he's not the most famous. The most famous, you're going to go for King Richard the Lionheart or Bohemond of Toronto, or so if I had to pick the best crusader, I'm going to be unpopular when I say this, but King Edward the Longshanks, Prince Edward at that time, and I'll tell you why. Because he is more or less he's the only one who had success against Baibars. And as you know, Baibars, basically King Louis the Ninth on the Seventh Crusade, you can read about that in here, had attacked Egypt. He didn't do enough to capture it, but he did enough to destabilize it. So the Mamluks took control, and these people were dangerous. Like, this is like Saladin couldn't even dream of this kind of success. Like, this guy Baibars was so incredibly like vicious. He just comes up, And King Edward the Longshanks, that's true. King Edward the Longshanks was able to, he was the only crusader who had success against Baibars, because Baibars had completely he had captured several crusader fortresses, parts of the coast, and he had also taken the Principality of Antioch. And what he did when he took that city, whew, I wouldn't want to be in there. Anyway, so and he was the only one, and as John rightly points out here, dude straight up beat down an assassin. Yeah, those assassins were pests, shall we say? They weren't. In fact, in this, King Louis the Ninth. See, the thing that's interesting about the assassins is, for example, a king shows up in the Holy Land. They pay protection money to the assassins so the assassins don't touch them. Why? Because if a king is dead, that's the end. There's no king to replace him. Whereas the Templars and the Hospitallers, the two knightly orders in the stationed in the Holy Land, the the assassins paid protection money to them, because if an assassin kills a Templar, by the way, good luck with that. If an assassin kills a Templar, a new Templar will take his place, and it's not like the king where there's only one king. The whole order eventually will become the Grand Master of the Templars until there's none left. So for that reason, it was the exact opposite. So they had to get protection. They had to pay off the Knights Hospitaller and the Knights Templar. So that just, yeah, and Prince Edward had totally owned an assassin. Now, the assassin did manage to injure him. There's a big debate who sent that assassin. Some people say it was Baibars. See, that's the thing. There's all these conspiracies about, some people think Richard the Lionheart was responsible for assassinating Conrad of Montferrat. Well, at the end of the day, the assassins, they only answered to the old man of the mountain. That's the only one who was in control of them. Now, I saw a good question. Would you be a crusader? Now, I think it's, would you be a crusader if you lived in that time? Well, keep in mind, to be a crusader, you had to be rich. You had to have a lot of money. it costs 3 to 6 annual incomes to go on a crusade. So, like, who here has 3 to 6 annual incomes saved up in their checking account right now? Not many people. But say I had that money, would I go on crusade? No. That's not really my thing. I'm not really a combat guy. Well, okay, if I did go, I'd probably be more of an admin type guy. Like for example, I've got 2 accounts of the Fourth Crusade. Geoffroy de Villardouin and Robert of Cléry. Now, he was like one of the administrators on the crusade. That's why his primary account is so good. Robert of Cléry was a knight. So but no, like, in terms of me, there's no way that I'd want to be there in the action. That's not my thing. I'm not. But I could see myself. I'll tell you what, I could see myself, though. I could see myself living in the Crusader states. I could see that. Apparently, Tyre was extremely well fortified back in the day. It was very safe. I think Ibn Jubair talks about that. He was impressed with its fortifications. All right. All right. Hold on. I got someone. Okay, I'm just arranging an interview I got tomorrow. I got an interview tomorrow with William Albrecht on the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin. So I'm looking forward to that. We're just finalizing the time there. Anyway, the point is, all right, let's get back to the Crusades. All right, any more questions? Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was the best. Yeah, he was definitely a good preacher. You know, he also preached against some crazy anti-Semitic monks and stuff like that. So, and of course, in terms of theology, I like Saint Bernard quite a lot. There's a church in my city called Saint Bernard, and there's a girl I know. She was accepted into the church there. It was the only time I went there, but they've got an outstanding priest. It's Novus Ordo, but like he does it ad orientem. He does portions of it in Latin. All right, so if there's no more questions coming, oh, a friend's calling me. I gotta. Okay, so I was born in Tyre, Lebanon. Wow, kind of jealous. All right, so now if you want to learn about the Crusades, okay, opinions on Saladin. Okay, he's an interesting character. He's loved by the Muslims not only for defeating the Crusaders at Hattin and taking Jerusalem. He is famous also. The first famous thing he did was he suppressed the Fatimids in Egypt, which were a Shiite caliphate. And then he essentially aligns them with the Sunni caliphate, which was in Baghdad at the time. So the thing about Saladin, he was a really good statesman. He was able to unite everyone in the region, Syria and Egypt, and he got even the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, to ally with him against the Crusaders. He was a really good statesman. And on the Third Crusade, Frederick the Great he's going to go the route overland, whereas King Philip and Richard both went by ship. He's going overland. And the emperor, who was Isaac II, refused to ferry him over. He's like, no, I'm with Saladin. Sorry, screw off. And this is interesting because the Fourth Crusade involves this guy. So what what Frederick does is he goes around and starts seizing his kingdom outside Constantinople. He seizes the city of Adrianople, and he threatens the emperor. He's like, all right, you want me to keep going? And then he's like, no, I'll ferry you across. So that's what Saladin was good at. He was being a really good statesman. Now, in terms of combat, of course, he defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, in July of 1187. Now, what is interesting here is that the Crusaders were under Guy of Lusignan, who made a really stupid move. Guy of Lusignan was not a good commander, and so he takes his the army, who has he takes the army and he marches out to meet Saladin, but he has no water, and so his soldiers are super dehydrated, and the whole thing was just so poorly planned. But Saladin beat them, although apparently he had quite a few casualties. Like, it's not like the Crusader just went down, but yeah, but he beat them, and he executes pretty much all the knights except for a few top ones after that. He executes Reynald of Chatillon, who's this renegade crusader who is not really a good guy. He's thought of very poorly. So anyway, the point is that Saladin, he executes 95% of the army. And then essentially there's no army to oppose him, so he starts mopping up. So he's mopping up, but there's no army to oppose him. So it's just taking candy from a baby at that point. There were some soldiers at Jerusalem, and so he attacks Jerusalem and he takes Jerusalem. Talking about Saladin. So I mean, those are his two big victories. But he had a lot of losses against the Crusaders. A lot of people don't know that. He lost at the Battle of Montgessard against what was his name? King Baldwin IV, the leper king. He got smashed by Baldwin. He got smashed again by Baldwin. Then in the Third Crusade, at the end, he tries to capture Tyre, but he's defeated by Conrad of Montferrat. And then the Third Crusade comes, then King Richard the Lionheart shows up, and he completely owns Saladin on... They engaged 3 times in total, but directly in like an open battlefield, full armies, they only engaged once, and Richard won very decisively. And taking that away from Saladin, Richard was that good, he was amazing. And then Saladin knew in 1192 knew the crusade was probably going to end in a treaty. He tried to take the city of Jaffa, so he could secure a bigger bargaining chip for the treaty. It didn't work. He was defeated by Richard quite brilliantly. And so anyway, he goes to, and then they signed the treaty for 3 years. I think it was 3 and a bit, like 3 years and 8 months or something, was the treaty. And of course, the Crusaders were allowed to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to complete their vow, but Richard the Lionheart did not. He wanted his vow to be unfulfilled, so he goes back to Europe with full intention of coming back one day. The reason he had to go back to Europe is because King Philip II had left and was stealing his land in France, so he had to go fight Philip II for his lands. I'm not a fan of King Philip II, King Philip Augustus, and he won them back, but then King John comes to power and loses everything because King John is an absolute joke. Anyways, to comment on Saladin overall, in terms of commander on the battlefield, he's average at best, might even be below average. He didn't beat any of the competent crusaders. I don't think he beat Baldwin II. He may have in a small skirmish, but he lost to Conrad of Montferrat, lost to Richard the Lionheart. So, like, as a commander, he's not that good. As a statesman, he was excellent. All right, next question. What do you think of the Knights Templar? What do you... well, I don't even know if I want to answer this one. What do you think they found in the temple? Well, the temple wasn't there. They used the Dome of the Rock as their headquarters. The Muslims weren't happy about that. All right, more questions, guys? Oh, wait, they found the Holy Grail. No, I'm just kidding. All right, no, they didn't. All right, I'm going to start talking about where to, what to start reading if you want to do the Crusades. All right? You're going to want to read this book. Now, I'm personally a big fan of primary sources. This book's not a primary source, but this is kind of like, it talks about all the Crusades in it. It gives a brief overview. It probably spends 15 pages on each crusade. No, they didn't find the shroud. The shroud was in Constantinople. The shroud was in Constantinople. When the Crusaders sacked Constantinople, they took the shroud back to Europe. All right. Now, so yeah, this book is where you want to start. It just gives you an overview of the Crusades, kind of like a tour on a helicopter over a city, points out the major landmarks. You're not going to get the specific details here, so it's where you start, but it's not where you stop. Now, try to focus as much on primary sources as you can. So I'm going to tell you where to start. This is what you want to buy. This is the First Crusade. It's not everything, obviously. It's got parts of Fouché of Chartres. It's got the speech that Pope Urban II made to start the crusade. It's got accounts of the Rhineland massacres, because there was this rogue, because the Pope says to liberate the Holy Land, but then there's this guy named Amico, this crazy rogue crusader who goes attacks Jews in the Rhineland. And it has primary accounts of that. And the Christians trying to save the Jews, actually. So, and then they go to fight the Saracens. And so basically, a lot of primary sources here. If you want one book on the First Crusade, this is it. And of course, it's University of Pennsylvania Press is edited, put it all together, and yeah, no, it's good. It's good. So that's what you want to. There is also a something that's interesting is there's actually most accounts of the First Crusade are from the Crusaders' point of view. You got Fouché of Chartres, Robert the Monk, but and a few others. But you also get the there's an account by Anna Comnene, in her the Alexiad. She basically wrote a biography of her father, who is Alexius Comnenus, the one who appealed to the Pope to call the Crusades. And she witnessed the Crusaders passing through the Byzantine Empire. And she comments, and she's more hostile to them. Not completely hostile. She says some good things about them, but it's not like the Fouché of Chartres type thing. So that's where you want to start. I'll tell you where to go now. And Jared, what was the theological importance behind the act of crusading? I know popes called some all of the crusades, and they were connected with indulgences. Yeah, that was it. You got the plenary indulgence. See, the thing is, these knights who were crusading, they, back in Europe, they didn't live the cleanest lives. So this crusade was their chance to get the slate wiped clean. And so they could go back to Europe with a clean conscience. Of course, a lot of them died on crusade. Now, you have a follow-up question. Could this theology be applied in modern times in the life of the church? Well, in theory, yes. On practice, no. From the time of probably the mid-11th century to when was it? To about 1300, the Pope had unspeakable power. He had power that you couldn't even imagine. He could excommunicate a king of England or France, and then no one would pay attention to him. If he excommunicated the King of France, no one would pay attention to the King of France more than like some random farmer. If you're excommunicated by the Pope, you're nobody. Like, for example, he excommunicated, what was that idiot's name? The Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. And then Henry IV comes down to Canossa, dresses up as a hobo and in the snow and just begged for 3 days and 3 nights, let me back in. That changed. And the Pope didn't have that power about after the year 1300. So, like, think, a Pope in that time period could call people of every nationality to go on their own dime. The Pope didn't pay for crusades. On their own dime to go across the world to fight a holy war. Like, think, that power is unprecedented in the history of the world. But let me give you an example. In the 1480s, the Spanish Inquisition had started up. Sixtus IV had allowed them to start it in 1478, and they started in 1480. So then it starts in Castile. That's where it starts, specifically in Seville, then spreads to the rest of Castile. It does not come to Aragon for a few years. They don't really know what it. Yeah, it goes to Aragon eventually. It's an interesting story how it spread there. Anyway, the point is, you have the Spanish Inquisition. There's some abuses early on. So some conversos flee to Rome and talk to the Pope there. And they're like, Pope, this Inquisition in Spain's out of control. So the Pope writes to King Ferdinand II, Ferdinand of Aragon. And he's like, look, you have, look, and he tries to like dictate to him how to run his Inquisition. It's like, yeah, make sure you have us as a last appeal and get the diocesan bishops involved, blah, 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 blah. And he's trying to tell him what to do. And King Ferdinand writes a nasty letter. It's like, you worry about Rome. You worry about what's going on there. This is Spain. I'm in charge here. Whoa, very different than when the Pope can call anyone in Europe to go across the country on their own dime, across the world on their own dime. It was a very different place. In the 1480s, the Pope didn't have the power he once did. Okay, Thomas Coward. There's pretty strong evidence the knights had the shroud with them in Jerusalem and brought it back to Europe. I know they claim to have the lance that pierced Christ, but can you cite me a primary source on that? I mean, if you can cite me a primary source, I'll look into it. So, yeah, because because I'm all about primary sources. Now, the scholars don't typically say that. Now, they did take stuff. So, yeah, if you can cite me a primary source, Thomas, I would research that because I got quite a few primary accounts. So, yeah, so these are the two books you want to start with on the Crusades. Yeah. Vatican Archives and Malcolm Barber wrote about it. Well, I hate to break it to you, Thomas. I don't have access to the Vatican Archives, but I'll look at Malcolm Barber and see what sources he does. But I'm sure there should be some primary chronicles on it. So you have these two books. These are where you start. This is kind of, this is kind of the view from the chopper, of the whole thing. But it doesn't go in depth. But here is the primary sources that you want to read. And then if you want, you can read Anna Komnena. If you want a Greek account of it, she was the princess of the Byzantine Empire at the time. So her account is worth reading. Okay, I got a question for all you guys in the chat. I want you to put down your faith. Just say Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Muslim, atheist, Jew, whatever. Put your faith down in the comment section. I'm assuming most people are Catholic, maybe a few good Protestants. Is Father James here? Okay, so what happens? Okay, now in the First Crusade, they, as soon as there's what's called the People's Crusade. There was a bunch of like farmers with pitchforks, Catholic. Okay. There's a bunch of farmers with, with pitchforks. Maybe I'm being exaggerating a bit. And they're the first wave of the crusade. And they were kind of rowdy outside of Constantinople. So Alexius Comnenus, Alexius I, ferries them across. And once they're ferried across, they raid a couple Turkish forts. And but as soon as they come up against the main forces, I assume they'd be commanded by Kilij Arslan. They get completely wiped out. A bunch of them are captured and sold off as slaves. Yeah, and then the actual Crusader shows up, the knights, the people who know how to fight. So they get ferried across, and they all swore an oath to the Byzantine Empire that they would give back lands that had belonged to him prior to the Turks showing up. So now the Turks enter Anatolia in 1071, right? These are the Seljuk Turks. Now they take over Anatolia. It's interesting how they were able to do this because there's like a civil war going on in the Byzantine Empire, and basically different sides were using the Turks, and eventually the Turks take over 95% of Anatolia. So the point is they're going to win it back for the emperor. So they go, they free Nicaea, the council. That's where the Council of Nicaea was, the first and second one. And then they give that back to the Byzantine Empire. Then they're going further into Anatolia, and they get ambushed at Dorylaeum, and they manage to defeat Kilij Arslan. So they beat Kilij Arslan in this pretty epic victory. Then they go down to Antioch. Now it takes a while to take Antioch. It's a huge city. It's well fortified, but I think it was Bohemond, as they say in French. He apparently every night he would just go and walk along the walls, and he would chat with the people there. And apparently, he finally made friends with a guy. I believe he was an Armenian who had converted to Islam under the Turks. All right, Thomas, can you get me the name of the book so I could type it in to Amazon? Because I'd be interested in reading about this. What primary sources they quote. Anyway, the point is, where was I? So they've this Armenian that converted to Islam became friends with Bohemond. He opened the door, and the rest is history. Then you have the Seljuk Turks, not the same empire as the ones they had fought in Anatolia. By this time, the two Turkish empires had split, the Sultanate of Rum and the Seljuk Turks. I don't know a lot about the split. But essentially the Sultanate of Rum in Anatolia was a successor state of the Seljuks. They're the same people essentially, but they're two separate empires. So they've taken Antioch. Now, I believe it's at around this point. Now, keep in mind, at this time, a crusader of bandit named Stephen of Blois, and he goes up and he meets the emperor who's mopping up liberating Anatolia, but he's like, oh, this whole thing is lost. And so then he goes back to Constantinople, the emperor, and when the Crusaders found out, they repudiate their oath to the emperor. So, and then they eventually capture the county of Edessa. It's kind of an interesting story, and they've captured Antioch, and now they're going to march on Jerusalem. And I think at this point they get a letter from the Fatimid Caliphate. They're like, well, let's kind of work together on this. You know, the Turks are my enemy too. Let's drive them out of the area. And the Crusaders, because at this point, the Fatimids had taken back Jerusalem from the Turks because the Turks had just been hit so hard by the Crusaders at Antioch. So they were weakened, and which allowed the Fatimids to take it back. So they're marching on Jerusalem now. And apparently there's a lot of towns that were under Turkish control. And the Turks knew the Crusaders were going to Jerusalem, so they just let them pass. They're like, let them take out the Fatimids. Who cares? Because keep in mind, the Fatimids were Shia. So what happens is they go and they take Jerusalem. Then there's a Fatimid relief force coming. They go and beat them, and they established a kingdom of Jerusalem. A couple years later, they carved out the county of Tripoli, and you have all four Crusader states: Kingdom of Jerusalem, County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. Now, in 1144, now there's also something called the Crusade of 1101, which is actually the final wave of the First Crusade. It's not a separate crusade. So they're coming through Anatolia, and they come through Anatolia, and at this time, the Turks were more prepared, and they won. The crusade got destroyed. All right, let's see what we got here. Believed by some church refused to believe in the existence of Prester John or the Chalice. Well, there was no Prester John. I mean, there wanted them to be a Prester John. They thought the Mongols were Prester John. They thought Tamerlane was Prester John, because keep in mind, in around the year 1400, the Turks are trying to take Constantinople. They don't take it till 1453. But they're sieging Constantinople. Then Tamerlane comes back and smashes Anatolia, and basically the Ottoman Empire is in shambles. And then he leaves. So Constantinople's saved temporarily. And they thought Tamerlane was Prester John, this Christian exile in the East, who was coming to save the Christians from Islam. But what happened? But of course, Tamerlane wasn't Prester John. Tamerlane was a Muslim. But the thing is, for Tamerlane, he was just a conquest guy. His wars weren't jihad. He was just enslave and like kill anyone. Is a nasty guy. Well, one of the most evil men who ever lived. But he's not a traditional jihadist. So he smashed the Ottomans and yes, okay. What are you responding to? Voyage of the New Age is not a crusade. Fund a new crusade with the gold they thought Columbus might. If you could tell me about that might make sense. Like me, I've read some primary accounts of Columbus going to the New World, and it's kind of like this: they show up in I think it's San Salvador. They show up, and they talk to a local, the natives. And it's kind of like the atmosphere is like, so where's the gold? And they're like, we came here for gold. Where's the gold? We need the gold. And yeah, but at that time, crusades were essentially that time. If there was a crusade, it would probably be against the Ottomans because they didn't control Jerusalem. I think the Ottomans controlled Jerusalem around 1520 because they went to war with the Mamluks. The Mamluks are the ones that eventually kicked the Crusaders out. That's what Baybars was, a Mamluk crazy guy. Whew. He was like Tamerlane. I just heard it somewhere. I'm not sure. So I guess I shouldn't have said I know. All right, guys, keep the questions coming. I'm only going 1 hour. 1 hour is all you got. I'm at 42 minutes. So keep the questions coming. Okay, so now that you have, I'm going to go back to the narrative. It says in the description of this that I was going to talk about the Fourth Crusade. I got a couple primary sources on the Fourth Crusade here. Villehardouin and Robert of Clery. I got another one coming in the mail because there's actually quite a few primary sources available for this crusade, translated even. There's even a Byzantine account. Although that book's expensive, it's like $110, but it's a large book. It's about 500 pages, and it's not just the Crusades. It's basically leading up to the Crusades, because pretty much, okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson, because I'm an expert on history of the Byzantine Empire. You have Alexius Comnenus, who the guy who asked for the Crusades. He is the Byzantine emperor from 1081 to 1118. Then John Comnenus takes over, and then he takes over until I can't remember what year. And then Manuel Comnenus comes up. So fast forward to 1176. From the First Crusade to 1176, things are going pretty good for the Byzantine Empire. They've gotten chunks of Anatolia back, and Manuel Comnenus gets overly arrogant. This is Emmanuel the First. He decides to do kind of some crusading of his own. And he's like, I'm going to drive the Turks out of Anatolia. And he goes and takes the Turks in, takes his army into Turkish territory, and they're destroyed in 1176 at the Battle of Myricephalum, and he loses a bunch of Anatolia. He loses, I believe, the city of Dorylaeum and a few other cities. So what happens then is he's succeeded by Alexius II. Then you, for the next 20 years, or 30 years, I should say, you have the the Byzantine Empire is like Game of Thrones and The Sopranos mixed in one. They're all, people are killing each other for the thing. And at that point, parts of the Byzantine Empire break away. Like Cyprus broke away. They're like, we don't want this. So basically at this point, the empire is falling apart, which allowed them to capture Constantinople on the Fourth Crusade. I'm making a point on all this. But yeah, so basically things start going down for the Byzantine Empire after Manuel the First. It gets palace intrigue goes through the roof, and then eventually culminates in the sack of Constantinople by the Crusaders in 1204. All right, let's. Are there any extant Jewish primary sources concerning the Crusades? There's primary sources about the Rhineland massacres. I believe there is one about the Crusades. I don't know if it's translated in English. I think if you can, I think there is one. I think there's a Jew who is in Alexandria who wrote about it, but it's not translated into English. Okay. Do you think the Crusades had any real impact on the chances of ending the schism between Latin and Greek Church? No, it did. I mean, the First Crusade was asked for by Alexius Comnenus because of Turkish aggression, but the friendliness was short-lived because they had repudiated their oaths to him when he refused to back them up at Antioch. And at that point, it only gets worse. Then you got the Fourth Crusade, sacks Constantinople, and that really drives a wedge. And in fact, I may do a whole thing on the Fourth Crusade. All right. I think the earlier Crusades were entirely justified since the Islamic Empire was constantly expanding towards even Christian lands, turning them Muslim. Okay. This is interesting. Now, because keep in mind, at this point, the Islamic world was highly fractured. At the time of the First Crusade, you had the Fatimids, who were a Shia Muslim group headquartered out of Africa. I think Egypt. And they had Jerusalem. Then you had the Turks come from basically Central Asia through Iran into Anatolia. And they were going to war with a lot of people. They were going to war with Arab Muslims, the Fatimids. They were, and so basically there was a lot of, now the Turks eventually would get up into the Balkans, but that's later Turkish Empire, specifically the Ottomans. But like the Sultanate of Rome, basically at the end of that was, they never came close to sieging Constantinople. You have to wait until the Ottomans, until you get the real jihad spark, and they go. All right. It widened the chance for schism when the Land Crusaders took Constantinople. Yeah, but there's, like I said, I'm reading the primary sources on that. I got more on the way. There's a lot more nuance than people think. Keep in mind, the empire was highly unstable at that time, which allowed them to take Constantinople. Because, like, for example, if you're a group of 11,000 crusaders, which they were, you can't go into a well-functioning empire and sack their capital. No. This was a very fractured empire. As I said, Cyprus had split away, and a whole bunch of areas had split away. Like when Cyprus split away, they became, and it got captured by Richard the Lionheart on the Third Crusade. And so, yeah, I mean, it was starting to fracture, but yeah. But a thing that's interesting, though, is that crusade, the Fourth Crusade, Constantinople was not the first Christian city they had attacked. They had attacked Zara so they could spend the winter there. This was at the request of the Doge of Venice, Enrico Tondolo. And the Pope was furious when he heard about this because basically the Venetians and Hungarians were fighting over this city, Zara, and the Hungarians at the time had it. And so the Venetians got the Crusaders to attack it. And the Pope was furious at this because not only had they attacked fellow Christians, but they had attacked the Crusader states, Crusaders, because the king of Hungary was under a Crusader vow. So his property was technically protected by the church. And that's his property was the kingdom of Hungary. So it gets attacked by the Crusaders, and then they eventually go to Constantinople. It's a long story why. But the point is, when's the last time you've heard a Hungarian complain about Zara? When's the last time you've heard a Greek complain about Constantinople? Probably the last time you talked to them. Anyway, yeah, they always bring that up, but time to move on, guys. You know, obviously it wasn't good. All right, you got 9 minutes. Any more questions? I just got Oh, all right. All right. Keep the question. Okay, here we go. Jared, once the Crusader states in the Levant were dissolved and the time of the Crusades had ended, what legacy did that period leave on Muslim inhabitants of the region in later centuries? Very good question. And the person to get the answer is here. You have to read Thomas Madden. The Crusades were forgotten in the Muslim world until the Ottoman Empire fell and the Brits came in and took charge of that. They were not completely, but widely forgotten. Because look, the Franks, as they called them, the Frange, just occupied a coastal region for a couple hundred years. That region was a thing I like to ask Muslims is like, oh, the Europeans had no right to be there. Well, did Saladin have a right to be in the Holy Land? He was a Kurd from Iraq. How about Baybars? He was from Central Asia. Anyway, the point is, tons of people controlled that land. The Turks, based out of Constantinople, controlled that land for 400 years. The Mamluks from Africa. All right. Yeah, and so basically the Crusades were forgotten about until the Middle East gets colonized. In fact, Kaiser Wilhelm I or II, I can't remember, in 1899 goes to Damascus, and he wants to see the grave of Saladin, the tomb of Saladin. It's like, I want to see the tomb of the great Saladin. And like he goes, and Saladin's in like some crummy grave. He's like in some, like he's not treated like the Europeans, because keep in mind, Richard told them stories about this great leader Saladin, and so the German emperor, so scandalized, he funded a mausoleum for Saladin, and he puts on a bronze wreath on it that says, "From one great emperor to another." So, so they were essentially forgotten. So their memory of the Crusades is a reconstructed memory. All right, what is your most and least favorite crusade? Favorite? I'm going to be. I mean, I kind of like the Third Crusade because it has the most drama. It's got all the big names: Saladin, Richard the Lionheart, Philip II, Frederick the Great. And Frederick the Great it's kind of a shame what happened to him. He's going overland. The Byzantines tried to obstruct him. He's going overland through Anatolia. He fights Kilij Arslan II. I think it's Kilij Arslan II. Anyway, the sultan of the Sultanate of Rum, just outside of Konya, and smashes them. It's like, boom, there you go. Then a few weeks later, he's crossing a river and he drowns. He just drowns. Apparently his horse kicked him off and he's wearing heavy armor. And so, yeah, that was kind of unfortunate. Still, it's my favorite crusade, though, because all the important people were there. My least favorite crusade, I think, is the Fourth Crusade, although it's fun to study. It's fun to study. The Turks were trying to be Third Rome as the Sultanate of Rum. Well, kind of, actually. The Muslims have always kind of had a thing for the Roman Empire. They always desired it. In the Quran, chapter 30, it's Surat al-Rum. It's about the Roman Empire, and it talks about the Romans and the Persians. So they've always envied the Ottoman Empire. Then they had the Sultanate of Rum, which was like a Turkish Muslim Roman Empire. And when, in 1453, when Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror enters the city, he proclaims himself the Emperor of Rome. And that remained a title of the, you know how kings have all the titles and stuff. That remained a title in his, like kings have all the titles, you know. And so, yeah, that remained a title of his. So they always liked the Roman Empire. They just wanted it theirs. They didn't like the fact that it was a Christian empire. All right, 3 minutes left, guys. I got time for one more question if you ask it quickly. I'll take the first one I see. All right. So, yeah, just let me get back to what I was going to say. Get these books. This book is The New Concise History of the Crusades, updated student edition by Thomas Madden. Then you got The First Crusade, The Chronicle of Fouché of Chartres and Other Materials, second edition, edited by Edward Peters. So this is where you're going to start if you want to study this stuff. And then just talk to me on just send me a DM on Twitter, and I will tell you where to go after you've read those ones. Looks like there's no questions. Okay. I'm going to add one more thing to this one. A crusade that is least favorite also. I said the Fourth Crusade, but something that's also annoying is the Fifth Crusade, and I'll tell you why. Because they had a chance to get Jerusalem back because they were invading Egypt. And they were, for a while, they were completely owning Al Kamil, who was the Sultan of Egypt. And he offers them a plea bargain to give them a bunch of land in the Holy Land, but including Jerusalem and the True Cross, which he held because Saladin had won it at Hattin. He had captured it. He offered all that, and they said no because they wanted the Jordan Valley as well. And then they continue fighting them, and he gains a victory over them, but he wanted them to leave so bad that he gave them a bunch of concessions. No longer Jerusalem, that was off the table, but there was but they still got some stuff back. I believe they got the True Cross. Okay. One question. Was there a crusade in Ethiopia against Muslims? No, there was not. What do you think of the channel Real Crusades History? Subscribe to his channel. It's really good. And he's doing a lot of other historical stuff too. I fully endorse that channel. All right, we're at 1 hour, guys, which means I'm out. Read those 2 books. Subscribe to Real Crusades History. I'm Alan Rule. Go to my website, alanrule.com. And there's the... There. See, there. Go to there. And yeah, I will be live streaming tomorrow. God bless.